Hi, I'm Audrey Fletcher and I'm here today to continue our voyage back in astronomical and geological time to discover the face of God. In part 1, I led you on a journey of my initial discovery of the long-lost and long-forgotten constellation of the Celestial Sphinx, a constellation which, because of its earthly counterpart at Giza, could have only been created by the remote ancient Egyptians. They observed the heavens and visually discerned the idea and formation of a concept through the embodiment of the Celestial Sphinx, whom they conceived and created. He has the body of a lion, but with a human face, giving a nod to the duality of the creators, for it was the remote ancient Egyptians who created the Celestial Sphinx, who in turn, metaphorically, created the heavens. Even as far back as 14,000 BC, there is evidence of God, the Celestial Sphinx, having a beard, the humanized form of part of the lion's mane. And when the earthly counterpart of the Celestial Sphinx was created at Giza, he too was endowed with a headdress which constituted a stylized version of the lion's mane, which is still in evidence today, for example, in the death mask of Tutankhamun. It was the Celestial Sphinx who displayed the original face of God, and indeed in the heavens he continues to do so. Meanwhile, his earthly counterpart at Giza displays the replica of that face, on earth as it is in heaven. In considering the original face of God, created by the remote ancient Egyptians, I will also be taking into account the accompanying headdress. After all, when you look closely at the star chart, it becomes apparent that it need not have been included, which makes it logical to assume that it was considered an essential addition. Perhaps this was the headdress of the remote ancient Egyptians. As well as having a delicately sculptured human face, both the Celestial Sphinx and his earthly counterpart at Giza display the uraeus, an emblem of an upright cobra, which in part symbolizes divine authority, the power of God. I will be revealing more about the uraeus in a later segment. The Celestial Sphinx and his earthly counterpart at Giza also wore a crown. I have included 3 examples of similar crowns worn in ancient Egypt at the top right of the screen. At the bottom left of the screen, in this early photo taken from a hot air balloon about 1911, you will see a hole in the top of the head of the Sphinx. Now who would have thought that? This is where the headpiece or crown would have been embedded. A much later face of God is that of Osiris, the god of the dead. In part 3, I gradually revealed the grand design and purpose of the ground plan at Giza, the creation of heaven on earth. The remote ancient Egyptians were astronomers and mathematicians, their science culminating in their forecast of the first perfect day, on July 4th, 14,000 BC. At this time, the later religious philosophy, pivoting around gods and the soul of Osiris, were not part of the grand plan. This came much later, when the role of the Celestial Sphinx had long been forgotten. I wonder, have you ever wondered why the face of Osiris, the god of the dead, is usually portrayed as dark grey, when the vast majority of ancient Egyptians depicted in paintings and sculpture are various shades of brown? Is it because dark grey is more symbolic of death and the afterlife? Or is it perhaps related to the dark silt which is deposited by the River Nile after the flood has receded, also associated with death and renewal? The answer will be revealed on the next slide. In part 3, on the sky map of the blueprint for Giza, the 3 pyramids are formed by the constellation of the Phoenix, so named by the ancient Greeks, the myth attached to it being about death and resurrection. In ancient Egyptian mythology, however, the precursor of the Phoenix was the Bennu bird, which, like the constellation of Orion, was also known as the soul of Osiris. The constellation of Bennu, the 3 pyramids, the Bennu bird, and the 8F crown are as one, representing, you guessed it, death and resurrection. Osiris is the personification and embodiment of the Bennu bird, adopting its attributes both physically and symbolically. Physically, the white belly of the Bennu bird is reflected in the mummy wrappings of Osiris, while the grey wings of the Bennu bird are represented by the grey arms and hands of Osiris. Finally, the grey head and grey face of the Bennu bird is embodied in the grey face of Osiris. Symbolically, Osiris adopts the Bennu bird's attributes of, you guessed it, death and resurrection. Attributes which can also be observed in the daily rising and setting of the sun. In part 2, as the Celestial Sphinx continued to expel his breath of life, the heavens were progressively created until the process of the creation of the universe was complete. His final act of creation was the sun when it rose in the east. To the left of the screen, you will see the photo I used to illustrate this event. I wonder, what do you notice about this photo which is curiously significant? Look carefully. Do you see the head and upper body of a male figure? Could this be the true face of God? I will leave you to decide. I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation and will subscribe to my channel. I look forward to sharing with you my continued research into the ancient Egyptians in my next video. Bye for now.